be really interested from the MIT survey, for example, to understand of the percentage of organizations surveyed, how many of them had an AI platform deployed, ready, that applied the right governance and structure and cost control and all the non-functionals that are really important in the enterprise world to get right. So concretely, I think if organizations, by all means, do the experimentation. Personally, I'm also not too, 95% don't go anywhere. It really depends on the cost per pilot. If we're spending an afternoon to build a prototype and it doesn't work out, yeah, okay. I might be really happy with a 95% failure rate because it's not like we're spending 6 months to build something and then failing 19 out of 20 times. So I think you also need to balance the cost to do these pilots because it is so easy to prototype a thing with AI. Sometimes some of the projects are kind of hard to get into details on, but during COVID, for example, a number of vaccination platforms had to be stood up around the world. And I had the pleasure of being involved in some of those. There was one project where we got a phone call from a government Friday afternoon saying, look, we need to have a contact center stood up by Monday. And over that weekend, we spun up a team. We had people in Germany, the US, and the UK working on that. And literally in 48 hours, we went from, we need a contact center to be able to do X, Y, Z on the Monday, it was up and running. I think it's unavoidable. People are going to be disappointed, frustrated, but you can't have progress without it. Some people will win, others will not win. I think that's just the way it goes. Baseline.
The baseline is designed to create an emotional response.
I've seen things you won't believe.
More human than human. Make you question everything.
What cloud did to availability of infrastructure and services and databases and stuff like that. Even simple things like how you test software. So previously in an on-premises world, you'd have a production environment. If you're lucky and well-funded, you'd have a staging environment. And you'd have a development and a test environment maybe. But when you move to cloud, yes, you could just go do that in cloud. But some of the things you could do was have an environment for each of your developers. You could spin up 2 production environments and actually switch between them when you do releases. And so you could just start doing cloud and do the same stuff you did before. But the people that really benefited from cloud was realizing that, look, some of the constraints we had in terms of hardware is limited. We don't want to overinvest in CapEx. That stuff doesn't apply anymore. So what can we now do in this new world? And I see a lot of the same. There's lots of the same kind of thinking sometimes in AI. It's how do we do the same process, but use generative AI to summarize the case notes and present that to a human, or use generative AI to generate a little bit of code for a developer that would be writing code anyway. So there's lots of that adoption journeys. The initial reaction is how do we use the tool in our existing ways of working? For me, the much more interesting thing is what does this unlock in terms of new ways of working and new things we can do? So this is when I was working for a company called Itron, who builds utility data management solutions. So meter data management. If you think about meter readings at your home all the way through to your bill being generated, there's quite a lot that happens in between. And when smart metering happened, lots of organizations went from getting, say, 1 meter reading a quarter potentially to getting 96 or some multiple of that a day. So the data volumes just exploded. And they could just rip out all of the legacy technology and start afresh with stuff that can deal with this volume. But for most, that just wasn't practical. So the software we had really said, look, let's bridge this new world where you've got all this amazing data with your old world that really just wants one billing determinant once a month so that you can send a bill to your customers.
So cloud was a huge enabler.
And I think for me, that is the most exciting thing that these technologies do. Google search and other search engines did this for information availability. And it's incredible what a power up that's been for us as humanity. Cloud has done it for infrastructure availability and the ability to build and get access to infrastructure, but almost more importantly, the ability to scale and fail cheaply. I think that drove a lot of the inventions we see, and probably lots of inventions we never saw because they weren't great ideas, but it reduced the capital spend on those. So as a society, we could just see so many more experiments and therefore benefit from the successes and those that had traction. I think AI, whether you're a vibe coding fan or not, I've got lots of thoughts on kind of vibe coding, but this is opening up. I've met people in finance and accounting who have literally quit their jobs and said, look, I've got a great idea. I've never had a way to put into practice my idea. And with this vibe coding thing, I now have a way to at least stand up a prototype, stand up a concept, and then see if I can gain some traction on it.
So are we moving to an era where everybody's a founder?
I think there is an opportunity for everybody to be a founder, for sure.
How is that going to play out in terms of quality of product? I mean, turning an idea into a business is a different journey from turning an idea into a product.
Yeah.
So productization, is going to be accelerated. Marketing of product. There's still the challenge of distribution and competition and the incumbent. Are we going to end up with a load of founders in therapy in 24 months? I'm not being dystopian, but that universal accessibility is so compelling and exciting. Are we maybe we're going to have a bit of a Gartner peak of inflation?
I think it's unavoidable. People are going to be disappointed, frustrated, but you can't have progress without it. Some people will win, others will not win. I think that's just the way it goes. But for me, part of the reason why I moved on from AWS, which I really enjoyed, it was great working there. I learned an incredible amount, was that I wanted to take time to really explore this space and see what is possible, what can we do as one or two people. And I've met some organizations that with two people are doing incredible things, like winning 7-figure tenders in public sector with a 2-person organization. It's unheard of what's starting to happen. And yes, there's a lot to know in terms of building and scaling a business. But again, I think that I've got a lot of trust in incentives and market economy and all of this to plug the gaps. And even though there's lots of gaps today, I can definitely see a future where kind of the lovables of the world, that type of experience goes beyond just getting your website up. It helps you do the marketing. It'll help you do go-to-market. It might help you with frameworks and contracts. And you can kind of see these business-enabling businesses that can help these, or new platforms, I guess, new types of platforms that'll enable founders to find their customer.
Governments specifically and enterprise have always been risk-averse in onboarding new vendors. There are long procurement, onboarding cycles done to favour known providers, shall we say. Certainly in defence is a great example where defence primes, large companies, totally trusted, within, and they provide. Your point there that we have 2-person businesses enabled by various AI tools that are winning government tenders 7 figures. Something's shifted somewhere in the risk perception during the procurement process. Why do you think that is?
I think for the founders that get it right, it's interesting if you don't have legacy, so to speak. Let's say you're a consulting organization and you've got hundreds of people doing consulting. It's really difficult, and I know lots of consulting organizations really are doing their best to drive AI and share that value with their customers, but it's still really difficult to kind of cannibalize what you've got. Whereas if you're starting from, look, it is me and my friend, my colleague, my co-founder, it's us. We need to decide what we incrementally get. Do we get more people? Do we figure out how to use AI effectively? And I think this is probably the reality for consulting, at least for a bit, it's do we figure out how to get the right experts, augment them with AI so that they have more leverage, and therefore can deliver a lot for customers? And the risk thing is, it's all relative. If the benefit is, if I can bid on a contract for a tenth of an incumbent, this is one thing about public sector procurement, at least. It's kind of hard to ignore me. If I put in a compliant bid for a tenth of the price, even if I'm small, it's kind of hard to ignore me. You're spending public money. So I think this is where there's a real opportunity to. We're not talking about 15% cheaper or 20% cheaper. It's significantly lower cost and potentially better service.
So we're at this crossroads of true economic diligence on provision. And there's a belief, there's so much marketing and media hype, there's a belief that exponential savings are real. And I think a lot of people in their own lives are also realizing, why should I pay that accountant or that lawyer or that planning application when I can run this through ChatGPT or Gemini or conversational AI and get 80% of the way there enabled without, I've just saved 1,500 quid there. I've just saved £3,000. So there's an acceptance that this is real in terms of the economic delta between traditional ways of doing things, which I think is everybody's thinking, wow, how can we transfer this to our provision of, in their roles, whether they're in public sector procurement.
The leverage you can have by using AI effectively and using the AI, especially in areas where really having a human do it doesn't really differentiate it. I think when we were talking about cloud and cloud adoption, we always spoke about undifferentiated heavy lifting and removing that undifferentiated heavy lifting. And it's there is so much of that, so much opportunity in that space. And if you do that, your consultants can really focus on the differentiated stuff, the really valuable part of consulting, which is probably where I think some of the brand and reputation and that kind of stuff will come in as well. You're going to want to work with people who have these types of values, who have a way of working and delivering rather than just purely based on the output that they've got.
When you've looked at these projects and you're in this almost pioneering entrepreneurial phase, how are you determining what those heavy lifting opportunities for AI are? And what are the metrics that you would use in your mind to say, this is one that we're not going to try and replace humans, there's an and here, but there's a significant economic benefit? What metrics are there that you would say allows you to validate an opportunity for AI native?
Oh, metrics is a great question. That's the question I love asking people. It's what numbers? Point me at some numbers. But to be honest, I don't.
I took that from the Martin Bishop playbook.
I really don't. I don't know, if I'm honest. Which is really, I guess, where I am on my journey. Is I kind of joke with my wife. It's oh, you're a CEO of this little nothing you just started. I just got started with kind of my own company, and I was yeah, but I'm not CEO as in Chief Executive Officer. At the moment, I feel like I'm Chief Exploration Officer. I really am trying to take some time to figure it out. what I'm really interested in when I speak to people, though, is like, where are the bottlenecks? Like, what's holding you back? And, it might be, look, we can't make enough outbound calls to people. We know we've got a good product. We know we have a high conversion rate when we talk to the right people, but we can't make enough outbound calls, or we can't do enough deployments, or we can't onboard. Like, for me, that's the interesting stuff to get to with a business, because there's normally not that many kind of choke points within a business. Like, it can be massive and very complicated and all that stuff. But quite often it's like, yes, if we had more of A, B, or C, or A, B, and C, then we could really grow faster or deliver more impact, if you're not in the commercial space.
Where were the bottlenecks in public sector? Where was the common choke points in government and public sector?
Oh, public sector is very vast. So I used to work with across charities, education, healthcare, and government. And yeah, in the delivery side, so technology provision, there are lots of good ideas, but because it's government and public services, there are also politics and policy changes and those types of things that come in. There isn't a lot of money. And I think one of the bottlenecks where, again, I think AI can potentially really help a lot in this space is that they are dealing with a legacy technology estate. And that is kind of a weird bottleneck because it's not a team, but it is a situation that makes it really hard to move quickly and deliver on policy mandates and policy changes and those types of things. And by addressing those, and sometimes we're really talking about 40 or 45-year-old systems that are still running really critical parts of government. And hats off to those engineers. I'll be very, very pleased with myself. I built something 45 years ago and it still works, like it still does its function. But they aren't necessarily built for integration and agent enablement and stuff like that. So one of the bottlenecks, I think, for AI adoption and just for driving change through public sector in general is some of the legacy technology estate. It's really, really difficult to address that, especially when you can't, like some commercial organizations can decide, like, hey, we're going to slow down on roadmaps. I know you've got lots of experience in product management. You've dealt with this dilemma probably many times. It's, look, we've got some tech debt, got a bunch of features we want to deliver, and we need to strike a balance here. The difference for me in public sector is like they don't really have that choice. It's like, here's new policy, there's new law, there's new regulation that must be implemented. And if you've got some money left, you can deal with some of the technical debt, etc. Obviously, especially in the UK, there's a lot of focus on understanding legacy and funding it and making sure it gets remediated. But like on the ground, people are always making that trade-off on implementing the next feature or addressing tech debt.
I had a fascinating discussion with a startup founder around the analysis of mainframe and the understanding of legacy, centralized, scale-up proprietary architectures within financial services, this sort of thing. And I thought that I came away from that mind. I actually went in very skeptical because my concern was that where the lifespan of the technology exceeds the lifespan of the human executive, the executive isn't going to make risk decisions that they won't see the benefit of. So why would somebody who's going to be in a CIO gig for 24 months try and take out a piece of infrastructure that's been there 20 years when it's running multi-trillion-dollar tier 0 critical applications? There's no human who wants that fight because the upside will be seen by the next but 3 CIOs, but the downside will be received all by that CIO. And obviously the structure of governance around them, right? This isn't individuals. But do you understand the dynamic that I'm trying to portray?
I do.
And where I got to in this conversation was the actual benefit of generative AI was being able to translate the code base into natural language so people could actually start to understand how it works and what it does.
Yeah.
As ridiculous as that sounds, that some of these technologies in the legacy estate, they're just not fundamentally understood. To a greater or lesser extent.
Yeah.
So and that's not something people want to admit. So they don't want the challenge. But as a step to leveraging Gen AI to understand the COBOL code in this scenario or other things like the architecture, to say in a almost neutralized form, this is how it works. At least you're then moving to this point of, okay, we have a very detailed understanding of what this is and how it works. Now it's not such a big high risk transition. We're going to pick it apart, perhaps, and we're going to maybe transform it in a granular way.
I think generative AI has a lot of potential there, and I've got a friend a friend called Tudor who does like loads of work. Super smart guy. He does work in something they call moldable development, and I think generative AI has a lot of potential. But Tudor also makes the point that, look, yes, generative AI can potentially help a lot here, but actually you can build lots of tools to get a lot of understanding of how this works. And the challenge with generative AI is because it is kind of fuzzy and non-deterministic in terms of the inferences that it might make about the code, is that you potentially lose fidelity, or you just get hallucinations, or you just get wrong analysis. So his view is much more like, look, you should build many, many tools, and from the ground up, you can build a specification or a model of how your system works, but in a very deterministic way. And I think where Tudor and I kind of think together on this is like, I do think like, generative AI, I use it a lot just to, what does this code do? And it gives you a correct enough answer in many cases. But I do think like there's a link between those two approaches of where can you use generative AI potentially to help you build lots of the tools, but derive the understanding from a true grounds up, kind of non-deterministic way of understanding how the system works. So I think there's really interesting, kind of practice being applied here. And a lot of it's not new. Like AWS have had a mainframe modernization service for like many years. IBM have got a bunch of these types of offerings. But yeah, generative AI kind of provides it's so accessible, isn't it? It's so accessible.
I think AI, what I was considering when we talk about public sector transformation, I think where there's a internationally competitive element, let me try and scope. Let's say we have a function of government that has some form of international comparative or competitive element. Defense could be an example. Economics, surely. There's probably other examples. Let's take defense. You're quickly highlighted to be out of date in a transaction if someone is moving at a higher rate, more certainty. And I think we've seen that play out in various global conflicts over the last 10 years, really, where almost the need to move quickly and evolve economically has been shown that these big legacy, long-term projects, high capital investment versus this, what I think is almost a emerging consumer, low-cost, high-impact, deeply integrated cognition and intelligence through some form of machine learning, artificial intelligence. It's really highlighting that this is very outdated now. I mean, you could argue like healthcare, like the tax system, they're not forced to evolve. Do you see the problem?
I think the incentive.
How do you force them to evolve?
I mean, they've got monopolies, right? Nobody else is going to collect tax, for example, in the UK. They've got a monopoly on it. I'm optimistic though. Like I think government really, especially with their new blueprint they've published, like they recognize the need to continue to invest. Like they've made huge advances already in the last 10 years that, and I had the pleasure of working with a lot of departments who've gone from, very traditional IT, doing everything in-house, not really doing DevOps, only releasing software in 2-year change cycles to there are teams in government that ship every week. And so I do think there is an appetite. It's driven by it's not necessarily driven by competition. There are other driving forces behind it, but there is definitely a drive. It's just how do you replicate those little pockets of success? How do you get that to be really broadly adopted and scale it? And I do think AI can really, in some ways, really help with that. And on the other hand, AI will really be hindered by the differential in different organizations' ability to adopt the technology.
I mean, I totally agree. By the way, the quiet evolution of the openness to adopt new technologies in the police, in government, I think is amazing. And one of the issues I've wrangled with, certainly over the last 12 months, is that the perception of government the public perception of government has not represented the reality of the conversations I have. The conversations I have with highly talented people who really understand the problems, and they are bringing to bear cutting edge technology, talent, ideas from global resources to improve public sector. Like, I totally see that. And one of my frustrations was that's not how the government's portrayed in the media. Not a problem I'm going to be able to fix. But where I've been at highlight, people, like Stephen, head of AI at Warwickshire Police, the stuff they're doing around ethical use of data from all sorts of different sources to massively improve policing service is amazing. It's amazing. One thing I would like to know from your experience, and I've seen a lot of companies get stalled at the pilot level.
Yeah.
And like there's so much excitement. Get into a proof of concept, a pilot. But I've seen a lot stall mine. Especially in both private and public sector.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Because MIT just last week, 95% of AI pilots have not proven a return on investment. So either the AI is just too expensive, or it's not providing the economic benefit that was ill-defined or well-defined within the pilot scope. What do you think we as in vendors, governments, companies could be doing better to somehow improve pilot success and actually see this in production?
Yeah. And I think this is where the kind of cloud all over again argument really, really resonates for me. Like cloud in the early days, there wasn't like the enterprise approach to governance and security and data management, and all those things have had to evolve in many organizations. You had project teams use cloud to deliver good outcomes. They worked with security, they did many things, but they had to do a lot of figuring out how do we secure the environment appropriately? How do we connect it to the relevant networks in the right way? There was so much friction in the early days to get it stood up, even though provisioning EC2 instance takes you 10 seconds. That doesn't get your solution working and integrating with the on-premise state and your identity federated and all those things. And over the last few years, most organizations have moved to have more centralized platforms and enabling capabilities that provide a highway, if you like. If you want to go over there, get on the highway. As long as you stay within these guardrails, you're going to have a smooth journey, and you can reuse a lot of these capabilities. If you need network access to over there, yeah, that's cool. Use this cloud gateway. If you need identity, that's good. Use this identity source. All of these kind of enablers that are not from a cloud vendor, like they're specific to the organization. And I think in the AI world, a lot of the pilots are strung together again without necessarily being built in the enterprise context. And it's really not a surprise to me if you look at what's the conversion rate? I'd be really interested from the MIT survey, for example, to understand of the percentage of organizations surveyed, how many of them had an AI platform deployed, ready, that applied the right governance and structure and cost control and all the non-functionals that are really important in the enterprise world to get right. So concretely, I think if organizations, by all means, do the experimentation. Personally, I'm also not too, 95% don't go anywhere. It really depends on the cost per pilot. If we're spending an afternoon to build a prototype and it doesn't work out, yeah, okay. I might be really happy with a 95% failure rate, because it's not like we're spending 6 months to build something and then failing 19 out of 20 times. So I think you also need to balance the cost to do these pilots, because it is so easy to prototype a thing with AI.
Just really interesting. Firstly, your depth of experience in operational delivery has just shone through there. And that's the gap that my initial premise was on. Now it's easy to build the pilot. All of the data governance you mentioned, management of the team, getting executives on board, stakeholders aligned, definition of the ROI, what are we actually... That's classic enterprise professionalism that you have. And you're in this luxurious position of having that and the agility and excitement and energy to go and do a startup. AWS is a powerhouse. What an awesome company that has been in mine.
It's been really good.
The professionalism, and I wouldn't even know how to financially value its aggregated transformation of global business. But I saw AWS, and it came out of nowhere, really. A lot of the Hadoop technology and Apache, a lot of it came out of Facebook. AWS, obviously, it was where Amazon were building global infrastructure. Google built global infrastructure, Facebook built global infrastructure that never had existed to provide 100% availability to a global, engaged, parallelized audience. I loved that whole early 2000s era. The internet was here and people were like, okay, we now can build global services. AWS were, what a phenomenal powerhouse of an organization.
It's really cool. I feel very, very privileged to have been.
I
had my little part in the AWS journey, and I think what's interesting about Amazon as an organization as well is just how it is a very large organization, but the culture within Amazon as well really drives ownership and autonomy and empowerment. And with that autonomy, you kind of end up with this federation of lots of teams inventing things. Also, lots of teams facing similar struggles, but with a leadership organization who spots that really quickly and says, look, the origins of AWS was Amazon had quite a large monolithic Oracle-based retail system, and they were, like many organizations, wanting to add lots of features to it, and they had developers tripping over each other. Build times were taking really long. Integration testing was really hard. And so very early on, they came up with this position that, look, we need to break up the monolith. Before, that was just the way things are done today. But back then, it was quite a different way of thinking about this. And stuff like the rumored API mandate that your services must have APIs, and that is how different parts of the organization interacts with each other. That's just really interesting. And I think that's how AWS came to be as well. Teams started building database provisioning services and object stores, because what's the alternative? Every little team that needs to store an image needs to figure out how to store an image. So as a large organization, what do? You build a central capability. And Andy Jassy and others had lots of the foresight to see, look, if this is really useful for us, then surely this is going to be really useful for others. But yeah, it's really awesome to see also the scale at which it operates. People like to say, cloud's just someone else's data center. It's really not. Yes, of course they have data centers, but it's so much more than that.
It's amazing and awesome at the same time. But tell me, I have followed a narrative, certainly over the last few months, where I've been looking at the reality of who owns AI. and sovereign AI. And sovereign was kind of a word for me that started to emerge around the GDPR time, where regulation started to dictate citizen data within geographic boundaries, all of the things that we've come to love from the ICO and data protection, and there's a whole load of conversation there. But when I look at the emergence of generative AI being driven by huge private companies, OpenAI, Google, obviously Anthropic, which I thought was obviously Meta. Anthropic just raised a huge amount of money, led by Iconic, which I believe is Mark Zuckerberg's personal family office. So, when you get into it, there's a small group of people who are owning generative AI globally, which is, I think, a great thing for its accelerated development because it moves very quickly. But because AI is becoming such a fundamental support structure for the individual, for the business, for the public service, how is that, sovereignty, how is that going to be handled? Are all countries going to become functions of US private entity technology? I mean, maybe that's not a bad thing. I don't know, but I don't see, sovereign equivalents moving anywhere near the same pace and sophistication.
I think it's really, we've got finite resources as other countries. Like if I take the UK, I'm South African originally, so I moved to the UK about 20 years ago, but I definitely consider myself like a UK citizen. This is my home now. And I thought a lot about, we've got finite resources as a country. Where do you place your bets to maximize benefit? It's like, could the UK build, an LLM, a foundation model? Probably. Is that the best bang for buck right now? Is that where we're going to get the most value as a nation? And I guess I'm personally not really convinced that building foundation models, especially, I think this technology could have evolved quite differently. It could have gone a very different way, where a small number of organizations kept it behind closed doors. It was only available to them. Open source models aren't quite as good as the commercial ones, but they're not far off. And practically, for many applications, like an open source model is plenty good enough. So, I think, it's so early days, and I definitely wouldn't put myself in a position to say, I know what the right thing to do. I think there's just lots and lots of trade-offs. Personally, for me, the highest value would be the ability to exploit the technology. There is so much unexploited value, even though the foundation model can do all these amazing things. Back to the MIT thing you mentioned, only 5% of pilots are succeeding. It's well, is it because there's a foundational problem with the technology? Personally, I don't think so. I think it has a ton of value. Something else is not right. And if, as a country, if we can figure out how can we exploit at scale this technology to benefit us, then that gives us a leg up.
And it's
but
legally
also,
and regulatory controlled. So there's all
so
rhetoric.
Many things.
I mean, you can have rhetoric around sovereignty, but the reality is, if this stuff is legally and regulatory controlled, it's as safe or as good as anything. Right?
I guess when you talk about sovereignty, you can also ask about operating systems. We are just a very entangled planet with dependencies on each other.
So there's an acceptance on globalization, I think, and then it's how to optimize your own personal and national scenario within that entangled global mesh.
I think that the really important thing to do is to talk about these risks and probably do some scenario planning and think through what does a plan B look like, but not necessarily to kind of defocus or focus all of the effort just on executing on a plan B and then not work on plan A in terms of getting the benefits and exploiting the technology.
And we're all benefiting from Linux, and that's Linux, I believe, won because it was a global community who were contributing in a very structured formal way. I mean, Linux has just been executed so well. But companies like AWS have made huge revenue and financial benefit by packaging these and delivering them in application stacks and governance structures. And
if you play it out, if intelligence continues to grow in these models, which it's intelligence, like you'll get lots of people poking at the word intelligence in itself. If the capability continues to grow, there are already kind of design houses that are almost entirely AI driven, where you can email them and say, look, I want a website, and you'll have an email conversation about what it is that you want. A prototype will be built. They'll send you a link. You'll send them some feedback. They'll make some edits, and they'll ship your website. And people have built businesses already today like that are all AI.
Agentic.
All agentic AI. So, yeah, absolutely. Whether it'll be $1 trillion business, like, I don't know, probably. But I think the whole, as you've had on some of the other podcasts, like our whole value system as a society, I think we're going to have to think about a lot, because currently intelligence is one of the things we value a lot in people, and the ability to apply intelligence to problems. And with AI evolving at the pace that it is, like, it feels to me like that's quite a fundamental thing that's changing. Like, one of the core things that we value is potentially going to become like all you can eat. Okay, like what do you value then? I think that's a really interesting.
For me, this starts to make me question how our academic and vocational business world hangs together. And vocation and enterprise essentially are taking people from universities and talent and embodied intelligence, as I've learned from my recent visit to Essex University, human intelligence. But intelligence is peaking at university in many ways. There's an unencumbered creative application of the human brain against pure academia or academic problems. I feel like there should be a closer connection between academia and human beings within the academic state and business.
Yeah.
Or businesses are going to rely on.
I think, again, coming back to something we spoke about earlier, is like if everybody can be a founder, then, and if that infrastructure starts to exist where someone really early on can very quickly take something from academia and transform it into something that can be applied in industry, like, yeah, I'm optimistic that like more of that's going to happen. I've got 2 boys, and one's 13, and I've been amazed at like their engagement with the technology. Like, I was on holiday with my son, and we got into a conversation about what would you like to build? What are you interested in? And he came up with this idea of, obviously watched something on YouTube, and it's like, oh, you'd like to build this evolutionary game where you have these blobs and you have sheep and you have foxes and different plants, and he wanted to tweak like the reward systems between these things and see like which kind of reward system makes the blobs thrive. And it's quite a sophisticated thing for a little. Yeah. He's a bit of a nerd. I love him. He's great. But of course, we were sat down by the pool having a conversation about this. Went back to the little flat we had. I took my laptop out and we just started building it. And he was sat next to me, a 13-year-old boy, super engaged, wanting to understand, like, how does this work? How does that work? And I ended up like moving the laptop from me to him, and he was engaging with it.
What tools were you using?
So we were using Claude Code and ChatGPT. So we were kind of using ChatGPT to help refine the idea a bit. So he kind of came with these, like, this is how I think the system should work. And we prompted ChatGPT, like, ask us clarifying questions. What did we not think about? What are the edge cases, etc.? And he was surprised. It's like, wow, it's got so many questions. It's like, yeah, well, what you think was a clear description of what you wanted to achieve clearly wasn't. And this is a lot of the challenge in software land. Like people think they make a clear statement of what they want, but actually there are so many edge cases and assumptions and shared context within people, or not shared context, which is even more dangerous, within people's heads, that the whole practice of product management and requirements analysis and all of that stuff is where you try and gain sufficient clarity of what you need to build. And like he just experienced that. So I don't have to like tell him like, hey, this is when you want to go from 5-minute conversation by the pool to software we can build. Like, here's what you need to do. We have to go from vague requirement to firm requirement. You're going to have to go through this process. I could just show him. It's like, look, let's just put your requirement in and ask it to clarify. And so he could experience this kind of for real based on his idea. And then we took that and put it into Claude Code. And yeah, within a couple of hours, we had something demoable. And for him, that was such a big learning experience. I think he learned so much in those 2.5 hours. For me, it's like, okay, well, education and learning going forward, it's like, how do you just have lots and lots and lots of those experiences? And how much can that add to you as a human? Like,
tight, explicit specification in the software development process was always my number one, personally, was my number one challenge, because I would have a vision of how I wanted something to work. I would have a rough outline of how I thought the architecture should look. And I believed it was as simple as you build that and deliver that. Now, as I found very quickly, the specification process is a very, very detailed process to be able to interpret your vision into meaningful code. To accelerate that just closes the reward time down. And, you know, certainly young people playing games are designed to have reward consequence tightly wrapped now. You know, the idea of sitting for 4 years doing a degree and waiting to get your, bachelor's of engineering or computer science out of the back end, that you don't have the high frequency reward cycles. So do you believe there's a scenario where that's just much more compelling than going to university? If he can build a highly sophisticated evolutionary simulation within with your guidance within half a day in the context of being a holiday, are we not questioning our entire socio-demographic structures of physical universities where we go?
I would still love him, like my kids, to have the opportunity to go to university, but probably more for just becoming a better human, like learn to build networks, identify your friends, be on your own. Like for me, that's a lot of the value. It's like, okay, get out of the house, like go be on your own, like just become an adult, gain some autonomy.
I'm interested. I've reflected. This idea of collaborative AI. So what you actually said it. You moved the laptop from you to him, as if there was this moment where you moved the responsibility of him piloting the AI. I do think there's something missing at the moment, which is the ability to group engage with these type of technologies. It's come up in a number of conversations I've had, and also the feeling that when you're using ChatGPT, you're building a great relationship. We can question what that word means in that context, but it's a very one-to-one symbiosis. I feel. What I believe is missing is, and I've talked about passive AI and AI that listens to multiple participants' conversations, but I feel like, wouldn't it be so much more powerful if you didn't have to move the laptop and you could have true, what I would say is community or group engagement with an AI that's understanding the personas, the stakeholders, the different views, and somehow multi-dimensional collaboration. I think that would be much better for the social dynamics of the AI user.
Yeah, it would definitely be. And I think this is one idea I've been playing with as well. It's like there's lots of talk now in this space around context and how do you carry context? And I can imagine quite soon we'll there'll be more AI services providing, differentiated value, and there'll obviously always be, well, there'll probably be, ChatGPT version 12 or whatever. But each of us is going to have context and preferences and things that we know, care about, prefer, etc. Like, how do you bring those to different services so that when a service engages you, like it understands your preferences, your knowledge, the context that you may or may not have? It's like, no need to explain to me from the ground up what you mean by this concept. If I'm actually, I did my PhD in it, like you could just use the shorthand. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves. And a lot of the providers are now, they're investing a lot in memory and context and like that user experience, which isn't necessarily changing the underlying model very much. But again, it's all about packaging that context and making it more bespoke.
Well, I like this idea of the entanglement of multiple contexts because ultimately, if you think about the context window and the application of vectoring specific to the memory within that application of the language model, everybody's going to build their own custom, I guess, built on their preferences. And AIs, certainly the consumer AIs, they're very generous in the way they support the user into believing that they're on this journey of positivity and that. When two come together that are fundamentally in disagreement, built on different contexts, different guidance, different memory, I'd be very interested to know how the weights within the system builds compromise in. And I've seen humans augment themselves with AI and then either email the output or articulate the output in a engaging way, and the humans somehow compromise or mediate or not to a mutually beneficial outcome. What I have not seen is multiple participants engaging with a single conversational AI that's somehow balancing the weights of the context and the roles and the individuals to create a unified outcome.
Yeah.
Unless I have missed a huge product set here.
One interesting thing I've been playing with as well, obviously being a kind of solo founder at the moment, is it can get lonely and you want some opinions, and I don't necessarily want to or can, from the business perspective at least, justify getting a marketing person and a lawyer and all of these. And there are really interesting frameworks out there. One is called AutoGen. I don't know if you've heard of it. So AutoGen is an open source project from Microsoft, and basically lets you create different agents and then kind of have a conversation with this group. And like one of the things I did with that is sort of an idea analysis meeting, if you want to call it that, just to put it into simple terms, where I've got different underlying models. So I used Llama models, OpenAI, Anthropic. And so you get different foundations in, and then different roles are prompted differently. I've prompted a legal person, somebody that cares about law and regulation, privacy, and all these things. And I've got a marketing person, a salesperson, a CTO founder. And the idea with this thing that and again, this kind of took a day's worth of playing to get this stood up, just how easy this is, was to drop an idea in. I drop an idea in at the top. They converse, and kind of some of them pull, some of them are prompted today to be a bit more critical, and the legal ones like, tell us why we can't do this, and the marketer is very focused on how we're going to get the word out, etc. But then you can also take a turn in these conversations.
You're at this fascinating stage of life where you have a huge spectrum of opportunity. How are you possibly going to choose or find your route into something that you find purposeful and meaningful and gives you everything you need from this phase?
It's really difficult. Who knows? I'm trying to say yes to more things and just accept that there's a lot that I don't know, and really try and learn from others. Experiment, be comfortable to experiment, and obviously need to do some things to pay the bills. So I'm trying to find stuff that's reasonably aligned with what I want to learn and engage with. But I think with this technology, there aren't really like kind of one-stop degrees that you can go do, etc., to get good at this. So my focus really is to take ownership of that myself, like apply the technology, fail, try, learn, and just become good at helping people. I guess that's what I'm really passionate about. It's kind of it's a mix between being an educator and teaching other people and really solving problems. Like that's what I run on. And fortunately, at the moment, like those things are reasonably valued. So for me, it's just finding interesting problems and then finding interesting ways to apply technology to those. But also really remembering, again, with my enterprise hat on, is like the technology is rarely the adoption problem. Like it's the people, it's the process, it's the governance, and kind of helping people understand that, like, yes, we're all very excited about the technology. It's excellent, but like the reality is, for you to get the benefit out of these things, we need to put some foundations in place. Again, with the pilots not working, I'll be really intrigued how much was invested in training. This is a new tool, and I think many organizations just tick the box to turn Copilot on or something like that and said, now we're running an AI pilot, and that's a terrible way to roll out a technology. And like you're going to get 90% failure rates. This is a tool. It seems very easy to use, and it can be, but to use it effectively, it's actually I think it's quite hard to bring the right context to the right tool at the right time to get the approximately mostly correct output. It's a skill, and like really need to figure out how to teach people how to do that.
I think it's a skill that evolves as the technology evolves and the human user evolves. I mean, you come with a phenomenal pedigree. Over the last 10 years, you've been involved in some really interesting projects. You have had amazing impact and have an amazing, very impressive reputation. What would you say are some of the key deliveries that you've done over the last few years that you're the most proud of?
So for me, the stuff that was most exciting was when we had like an immovable deadline. And sometimes some of the projects are kind of hard to get into details on, but like during COVID, for example, a number of vaccination platforms had to be stood up around the world. And I had the pleasure of being involved in some of those. Like there was one project where we got a phone call from a government Friday afternoon saying, look, we need to have a contact center stood up by Monday. And over that weekend, we spun up a team. We had people in Germany, the US, and the UK working on that. And literally in 48 hours, we went from, we need a contact center to be able to do X, Y, Z on the Monday, like it was up and running. So, those, I guess, are a bit of a thrill seeker as well. And like my adrenaline things, like those really get the blood pumping. And for me also demonstrate just what people can do under the right incentive structure and with the right enablers. Like in those projects, barriers were removed very quickly. People were trusted. Decisions were made super quickly. And like sometimes within a week or two, we did what would otherwise, I think, literally take a year.
Amazing.
So the COVID platforms and also on the other hand, just some of the really kind of slow burn things in terms of like working with organizations like Government Digital Service on like how they think about technology, where the opportunities are for better enablement and training. And like I get, like I said, I get a real kick out of enabling others. So some of my favorite work has been leading some of our content tracks and stuff at our big conference and those types of things where it's not being on the stage, so to speak, but it's really thinking about like what does this community need to learn about and how can we get the best possible speakers out there to, just to help, just nudge them along one step, ratchet in the next step of progress.
I mean, you're a proven operator over an extended period of time, and you've been in a critical role throughout pre the emergence and now the very early phases of adoption of generative AI. You have a very human approach and an open, positive approach to even leveraging this stuff with your family and using it. And you've entered this phase of life which with great courage, you're opening up your spectrum of opportunity with the knowledge and belief that this technology is going to be so impactful. It will allow you to find your way into your next phase of very existence and identity, which is hugely inspiring, by the way, Martin. I mean, I would be sitting pretty at AWS. But do you believe AI will take us to a utopia or dystopia?
I thought I might get this question from you. I'm not even going to disclaim. I can't bear the dystopian view, and I think it's up to every one of us to decide where it takes us. So I'm rooting for utopia, but I think we need to engage with the technology. You need to understand how it works. You need to understand how it's going to impact you, your family, your friends, and try and make it the future that we want it to be. Like it's not being done. It can be done to us, or you can, take some ownership, I guess, and make sure it's done in a way that serves us as humanity. So I'm a utopia person. I have to take that view, and I'm doing my best in my own little way to try and nudge it towards that. Although I recognize my influence is limited, but there's lots of people like me, I think, that can nudge it towards a really positive future.
We are in a computer game.